The most important skill you can master as a surgeon is knot tying. The sooner you start mastering this skill, the better. And today is aimed at showing you how you can practice your knot tying at home. I'd like you to consider this. The most important knot that many of us tie every day are our shoelaces. And I put it to you that we are tying our shoelaces wrong. Let me show you. I'd like you to take a look at my shoes. The right shoelace I've tied correctly. It is a flat knot, and the result is that the lace sits horizontally across the shoe. My left shoelace, that is on your right hand side, sits vertically up and down the shoe. I have not tied this correctly, and I can expect my shoelace to come undone at some time during the course of the day. Flat knot tightens itself as I walk, and it's unlikely my shoelace will come undone. Let me demonstrate this to you with a piece of string. As I've demonstrated with my shoelaces, a flat knot or uncrossed knot is secure. And what we mean by a flat knot is very simply this. It is a reef knot. And if you have a look at this reef knot, you'll see it is sitting flat on the table. And as I tighten the knot, it self-tightens. Compare this to an uncrossed knot, and we'll demonstrate that to you now. Remember that a reef knot is right over left and left over right. We were taught this as kids, and is not too much different as a surgeon. Now, if you'd like to have a look at this, this is a cross knot. In colloquial terms, we have often referred to this as a granny knot. But if you look at this knot, it is not sitting flat on the table. And as I tighten it, it doesn't self-tighten, it actually comes undone. This is the most important principle for you to grasp as a surgeon. And as we go through these exercises, I'd like you to look at each time you throw the knot and think crossed or uncrossed. For our knot tying skill station, we need a few simple things. We don't need a fancy manufactured rig. 2 large elastic bands, 3 pencils, some blue tack, 3 plastic cups, some dental floss, and some string. That is all you need to start learning how to tie knots. In the first instance, let us make a knot tying rig. Take your elastic band and put it over the end of your ironing board. You'll now see that you've got a good surface to tie knots on. Let us get started on tying knots. Knot tying. It is easier to start to learn to tie knots with a piece of string. 1, it is easy to handle. And 2, it's important that you look at each throw and understand when the knot is crossed or uncrossed. Now, there are a number of ways of describing what to do with your hands. In essence, you're alternating between index finger and thumb throw and a middle finger and thumb throw. In the first instance, you'll find that your hands are crossing and getting muddled. But as you get practiced, you'll learn that your hands are moving to ensure that the knot is flat each time. And your hands move a different direction depending on whether you use the index finger to start your throw or the middle finger to start your throw. Let me demonstrate. We start with the short end in my right hand, and I'm going to tie with my right hand. I'm going to hold the long end in my left hand. It's important, I think, when tying knots, to keep a degree of tension on the suture or on the string. I start by supinating the hand, holding the short end out with my middle finger, bringing the long end across, and you can see I've created a figure of 4. My middle finger is now free to come through that loop, and I'm literally flicking that short end through and taking it away, and I've got a flat knot. I've now set myself up using my middle finger and thumb. I've supinated again and holding the string out with my index finger. I've created my figure of 4, I've flicked that string through, and I'm taking that down. And I repeat the process. But in the end, one should end up with an even set of knots, indicating that you've tied a flat knot. It's really interesting learning to tie knots. That first throw is the most difficult, and once you're in the rhythm of alternating between a middle finger throw and an index finger throw, your hands, you'll find, naturally start moving. The next important principle in knot tying, once you understand crossed and uncrossed knots, is how do you get the knot to bed down? Now, there's a simple secret. It is in essence to throw 2 half hitches, to slide the knot down on itself, to bury it in the tissue and grip what you're tying. Let me demonstrate. One throw the same direction, followed by another throw the same direction, and you'll see that we've got 2 half hitches that naturally tighten and pull the tissue together. This should now be followed by a series of flat knots, flat or uncrossed, flat or uncrossed, flat and uncrossed, flat and uncrossed, and the knot is secure. How many throws do you need for these knots? Well, we're dealing with a piece of string, and string is braided. And with a braided knot, all you need is a maximum of 4 or 5 throws. The first 2 throws the same direction, followed by 3 throws the opposite direction. This rig I've set up here with elastic bands on my ironing board also enables me to practice another important feature of knot tying. That is, when you tie the knot, it's important that you do not pull the knot off the tissue you're tying. To enable you to do that, it's important that you pull across the knot, not off the knot. Let me demonstrate that to you now. If I do not put my finger down to ensure that I'm pulling across the knot, that is the potential hazard. And when you're practicing on this rig, I suggest that you tie the knot and ensure that your elastic band does not move. This is important because if you were tying the knot down in a body cavity, for example in the pelvis, and you are tying off the middle rectal artery, if you pulled across the knot, you'll be able to bury the knot down. But if you didn't do that, you'll be putting on the pedicle itself and run the risk of pulling the knot off the vessel. This becomes a problem. So the important thing about the simple jig that you can set up at home, it also tells you and reminds you not only to ensure that your knots are flat each time, but make sure that this is not moving, that your knot is stable and secure at all times. I'm now going to demonstrate to you another important knot. And this knot is very important when you're tying a rigid object. In particular, drains. The last thing you want as a surgeon is for your drain to fall out, and therefore your tie should be safe and secure. I'm going to use this plastic coat hanger for demonstration. Now, we've demonstrated to you slip knots. For an Edinburgh knot, we're going to take 2 throws the same direction. And in doing so, take it down, flat, this bites into the drain and stays in place. I can now follow up with throws, again telling myself flat or uncrossed and flat. You can test whether your knot has been successful by trying to slip your knot along the bit of plastic. I am confident a tie like that will mean that my drain will not drop out. So we're beginning to master how to tie knots using a piece of string. We understand the principle of tying a flat knot. This is effectively an uncrossed or reef knot. Flat, uncrossed or reef knot are all the same thing. You understand now how to slip 2 throws the same direction to ensure it bites on the tissue. Likewise, 2 throws the same direction to ensure it bites on a solid object like a drain and does not slip. Before we progress, let's pause to actually understand what sutures we use. They go into 2 types. The first, like a bit of string, is braided suture, and this is a bit of Ethibond. You'll note as it sits on the table that it doesn't have what we call memory. It has come out the packet fairly straight. The thing about braided suture, a bit like your piece of string, is quite easy to tie. The handling is easy and the knots bed down and hold themselves quite comfortably. And for braided suture, I would suggest 5 throws to ensure that it locks. The other suture we use in surgery is what's called a monofilament. In here we have some Prolene. This is a 2O Prolene that's come out the packet. And you'll notice immediately that it's come out the packet and maintained its memory. The important thing to understand about a monofilament, it's essentially a piece of plastic that's been pulled and pulled and pulled and pulled into a long piece of string. It's called a monofilament. And the difference is that this has a memory and is also slippery and slides. It makes knot tying a little bit more difficult. It means that you have to ensure that the knot is bedded down properly, and you need a minimum of 5 to 7 throws for each of these sutures. Now, you can practice with these at home once you've mastered it, but they might not be readily available. We'll introduce something to help you practice. In my practice as a heart surgeon, I use 7/0s on the bottom ends. You'll notice that this is a very fine suture. It is a monofilament and needs to be tied on 2 millimeter vessels. If I pull it too hard, if I do not put my finger on the knot, this will break. It is a monofilament, and just as in this monofilament, I need at least 5 throws to secure the knot. It's vitally important that my finger sits down on the knot to ensure that it does not break. But this is advanced, and I don't expect you to be able to master how to tie with a 7/0 until you can master how to tie a piece of string. What is there available at home that will enable you to continue to practice and master your knot tying? Well, dental floss. This is fantastic material with which to practice, because if you pull too hard, it breaks. This will ensure that when tying your knots, you are diligent in making sure that the knot is flat, uncrossed, or in other words, reef knot, and that your finger is across the knot and not pulling it off. Let me demonstrate how good dental floss is. Same principle again. Although it's thinner material, crossed and uncrossed still apply. I'm putting 2 throws the same direction, and you can see that even though it's dental floss, I can securely tie that rubber band together. I'm alternating my hands, forehand and backhand, both sides, making sure that each time my finger is on the knot. Now, one little trick to practice the knot being bedded down and to ensure that you do not break the knot is pause slightly at the bottom of your throw and ensure that your finger is sitting on the knot. I actually ask my trainees when tying knots to actually deliberately pause at the bottom of their throw, particularly with 7/0s and 5/0s and 6/0s, and actually say finger on the knot. It's also very important to say finger on the knot when tying at depth. Finger on the knot, finger on the knot, finger on the knot. Now, it's not exactly on the knot, but it sutures this thin. It's slightly off. So I'm actually, if you look carefully, I'm pulling across the knot and not pulling off the knot. And my finger is ensuring that the knot is bedded down. Finger on the knot, and I'm slightly across it. But the finger is on the knot, and as you see, I'm pulling across the knot but not displacing the suture. The elastic band is also a very good discipline to actually ensure that I'm bearing the knot, but I'm not lifting the elastic band off the table. The other reason why we're using dental floss is because if you don't use it properly, it will break. This teaches you not only correctness of knot tying, but also a lightness of touch that is required when handling small or fine sutures. Now, the same thing applies with dental floss as it did with string, tying a solid object. It is important that you are able to actually bed the knot down. And in this case, I'm going to do 2 throws the same direction. Remember, this is an Edinburgh knot. Make sure it is bedded down. And I'm making sure my finger is just beyond the knot, so I'm pulling across it but not lifting it off the table. And I'm bedding the knot down. Now, this is quite useful to put a coat hanger on a surface like this, because if I'm rough, notice that the coat hanger is moving. I should be able to tie this knot without the coat hanger moving at all. Once it's secure, again, if I've tied it properly, my dental floss knot should not be slipping and sliding on that surface. It's a good way of testing yourself to see if you're able to bed the knot down properly and secure it. So this is a 7/0. In front of the camera, you probably won't be able to see this. But during the operation, I'm wearing loops of 3.2 magnification and I'm actually wearing gloves. You can imagine it takes quite a lot of practice to tie the suture, but the principles are the same. The important thing is that I ensure that this knot is buried down. And although you might not be able to see the suture, you will see that I'm able to tie the elastic band together securely. Note that each time that I have my finger on the knot or just beyond it, so I'm not pulling across it and I'm not pulling too hard, because if I do, it breaks. So our next exercise to achieve that black belt in knot tying is simply this. I can set up a knot tying jig at home using polystyrene cups or paper cups. What I want you to be able to demonstrate is to be able to tie a knot at 1 phalanx deep, 2 phalanges deep, and 3 phalanges deep. This is not so easy, and the added difficulty comes by putting your cup on a bit of blue tack on the table. The important thing is to be able to tie your knot without lifting the cup off the table. Remember, we're now tying on a solid object. We've demonstrated how to throw knots to ensure that your knot sits and bites into a solid object. Let's give this a go. Again, we're using dental floss, and I'm going to demonstrate to you knot tying. This is at 1 phalanx deep. Now, the important thing is to ensure that your finger is across the knot, that I've paused at the bottom, I've said finger on the knot to ensure that I'm not pulling the cup off, and I continue to take this down. Precarious? Yes. Difficult? Yes. But this is an important skill to master in your knot tying technique. Whew. 1 phalanx. Let's move on to 2. Now, let's see if I can tie further at depth on my second model. Again, ensure that you've got good lengths. I'm using dental floss. And now I'm at depth. And it's important that my finger goes deep and my finger is just beyond the knot or on the knot, and holding it there and pausing to ensure it's bedded down, and my finger again goes down at depth. It's important that I tie this and I don't pull too hard, because if I do, you'll note that the cup comes off the table. In real life, this would mean that I've pulled the suture off the vessel I'm tying at depth, and I've now got a bleed. So the final test is, can I tie a knot at a full finger depth in the cup at the bottom? Here we go. Again, same applies, same principle of tying a knot. This time I'm right at depth, and I need to ensure my finger goes all the way through, right down, and is pulling across the knot. And on this occasion I'm going to do 2 throws the same direction to ensure that the suture comes off. Now, my blue tack is not very sticky today and has made it harder for me. I'll press it down again and try. Either blue tack or a bit of sellotape. Blue tack is the best. There you go. My knot's now being tied at depth. And each time I'm making sure that the knot is going down. Now, one important thing to note when throwing the knot at depth, I shouldn't be dragging the one string against the other. In doing so, it would fray. And certainly with dental floss, listen to this carefully, I was pulling one string against the other, and that potentially frays the suture. We've been building on our knot tying skills, from a piece of string, on an elastic band, and on a coat hanger, through to dental floss, to tying at depth on pencils put through paper cups. Your final test is to be able to tie off these fingers of an inflated surgical glove. Again, using dental floss. We can turn this into a rather fun game. Let me demonstrate this to you. What I want you to be able to do is actually tie each of these fingers off in succession, making sure that each time that you're tying the knot very securely. It's important that as I tie the knot, that I pause at the bottom, making sure the knot is bedded down, and I'm thinking all the time, flat knots or uncrossed knots. You'll see that the balloon mounted on the table is actually going to be very sensitive to all the movement of tying the knot. Don't expect the balloon to sit perfectly still. If you can get it set perfectly still, I put it to you, then you've mastered the art of knot tying. And practice makes perfect. So, I've tied all these knots, and I've tied off all the fingers. Are my knots secure? Well, it is a simple way of testing whether my knots are secure. I cut the finger off. My knot is secure. I cut the finger off again. My knot is still secure. your knot tying should be such that you can tie each of these fingers off securely without the glove going down. Because if it didn't, that would be the result.